Playoffs? Well, at least for some fantasy owners. Congrats if you're still standing, but maybe not so much of a congrats if one of your top guys might have had some questionable tags heading into Week 16. Taking a look at some notable injuries from Week 15, most notably Patrick Mahomes dealing with that high ankle sprain. And their win over the Browns, tough go for the Detroit Lions with David Montgomery out for the remainder of the season with a knee injury. Other running backs, Alvin Kamara being assessed for a groin injury, and Nick Chubb done for the year with a broken foot. Now bringing in CBS Sports fantasy sports analyst Heath Cummings is, hey, we made it through the fantasy football season. Well, at least, hold on, some of us, because if you're still standing, you're likely entering championship week in most leagues. But it feels good to be on top, but maybe not so good if one of your star players are dealing with injuries, including, Patrick Mahomes being your QB1. And although he did appear in practice on Tuesday, his status for Saturday's game may be still a bit in question. So let's say in the event you have Patrick Mahomes and you'd rather play it safe heading into this week, who's a top QB to claim off waivers?
Yeah, I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to play it safe. I think we all know what Patrick Mahomes is going to do on Saturday. He's going to hobble around for 3.5 quarters, take way too many sacks, and then when there's like 4 minutes left, he's going to take off and run full speed on a 25-yard scramble and set up a game-winning field goal and then win by 1 point. Probably a doink or something. But anyways, I would much rather start Aaron Rodgers this week, and that is not something I thought I would be saying in 2024. But Rodgers at least 289 yards passing in each of his last 2 games. He did not do that once the first 13 weeks of the season. He's got that connection working with Davante Adams. He is a top 12 quarterback for me this week, partially because of the state of the quarterback position. We don't just have questions about Mahomes. We lost Jameis Winston. He's been a really good fantasy quarterback. There's a lot of bad things going on at quarterback this week. Rodgers should be a top 12 option, rostered in only 45% of leagues. Add him and start him.
Now, not something I think I would assume for you to say if this was maybe, let's say, week 5, week 6. But hey, Heath, you talk about that Patrick Mahomes will be hobbling and then break off for a run. Maybe, do you know anything about the script writing? I'm just wondering, but. All right, well, look, week 15 was a tough go for several running backs, too. We saw David Montgomery and Nick Chubb both suffer season-ending injuries, and Alvin Kamara leaving the field with that groin injury. But if you had one of these tailbacks as one of your top running back options, who's a pickup that could maybe help fill that void this week?
You've got to feel pretty fortunate if Jerome Ford is available in your league. He's available in about half of CBS leagues. We saw him the first 6 weeks of the season without Nick Chubb function as a low-end #1 running back, about 40% rush share, 13% target share. Ford has actually averaged 5.2 yards per carry, largely because he has 3 different carries of more than 30 yards. Nick Chubb had 0 of those. Fantastic matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals this week. Their defense isn't any good at all. The only hesitation I have about Jerome Ford is the fact that they just benched Jameis Winston, and this offense might be a complete disaster. But Ford should touch the ball 10 to 15 times. He has big play upside. View him as a low-end #2 running back. I would start him over Travis Etienne, Ramondre Stevenson, Najee Harris, guys like that.
A clutch pickup if available on the waiver wire. But meanwhile, hey, Jaylen Wadd left Sunday's game with a knee injury, and encouraging news that it's not season-ending, but he is considered week to week. But just for someone in need of wide receiver play to maybe lift them to a championship, who should they eye on the waiver wire?
So this is probably the worst position on the waiver wire this week. Not a waiver wire wide receiver available in 60% or 40% of leagues. That's in my top 40 this week. But the top guy is Romeo Doubs. We saw him score 2 touchdowns in his first game back from injury with the Packers. He has at least 17 PPR fantasy points in 3 different games this season. A good matchup against a bad Saints defense. The problem with Doubs is the problem with all of the Packers pass catchers is on a given week, you don't know which 2 are going to be the guys. But if you're looking for a guy with upside who is available, Romeo Doubs the top option.
All right, so I want to give you a little bit of a personal story. All right, Heath, last week burned me because I went with Detroit's defense against Buffalo. That's because I didn't have any other option at that point on my roster. But we're entering that point of the year where every single point matters as we enter championship round. So if someone's maybe in a similar position as I was and needs a defense that can have an opportune week, who's the unit to claim?
Yeah, I think the one you're looking for is the Cincinnati Bengals facing the Cleveland Browns. Now, the Bengals I just talked about, they're not any good defensively. That doesn't matter when you're facing Dorian Thompson-Robinson. This benching of Jameis Winston's about the most amazing thing ever. Just because I know the interceptions have been terrible. You know who has a worse interception rate over the last 2 years than Jameis Winston? Dorian Thompson-Robinson. You know what he doesn't do, though? Is produce anything in the passing game. He's thrown 34 passes so far this season. He has 100 yards passing. He's averaged less than 4 yards per pass attempt over his career, about half of what Jameis Winston has. The only thing he has going for him is he doesn't really take sacks, but he does turn the ball over. His offenses do not score points. The Bengals go from being a laughingstock as a defense to the most desirable streaming defense this week.
Bengals offering an opportunity for some of those maybe turnovers going up against DTR. But Heath, I'm going to let you know, I've really enjoyed doing this all season long with you, but this is our last time doing this. But I can't let you go without you giving me a sleeper. Give me our final sleeper fantasy season, or fantasy ad this season that could maybe give us a little bit of value as I try to win my league.
So it's Jaylen Coker, and this was the rookie that was kind of under the radar. Everybody was excited about Panthers rookie Xavier Legette, but Jaylen Coker has been the most explosive pass catcher for Bryce Young this season, tops in terms of yards per target. We saw him come back from injury last week, 21 fantasy points, played 87% of the offensive snaps. This guy moved right back into a full-time starting role, and maybe you don't want to start him this week, but in week 17, the fantasy championships, he faces off against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have been all season long one of the best matchups for pass catchers of any position. Go add Jaylen Coker. If you need him this week, start him. If you don't, and he's good again this week, he may just be a must-start wide receiver next week. I still remember the championship I won in 2009 with Devin Aroma-Shodu. 2 games. You don't know who that is. Nobody knows who that is. He had 2 fantastic games in week 15 and 16, won me a fantasy championship. That might be Jaylen Coker this year.
See, that is why I come to you for this. I knew you could leave us with a great little sleeper because you've tried and true. It worked for you, so hopefully it can work for a lot of those managers out there that might need a sleeper as they're entering championship round. That is Heath Cummings. As always, I appreciate that insight, man. And just because fantasy football is coming to an end, that doesn't mean you can't stay in the loop. Make sure you check out the Fantasy Football Today podcast, where Heath is joined by Jamie Eisenberg, Dave Richard, and Adam Azer, giving you the best insight to dominate your league. Download and subscribe.